Atlantis is dead, guys. Atlantis is an idea. It's dead. And Flint Dibble, he might have killed it. He might have killed it. Yesterday was the release of the much anticipated debate between Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble, an archaeologist over in Cardiff, about the existence for Atlantis, the evidence for Atlantis. Basically, archaeology nerd, Royal Rumble, WrestleMania.
John Cena is now part of...
I've got some thoughts about it. I won't rehash the whole debate. I'll put it in the description, but I just want to share my thoughts as I've been publicly invested in talking about this idea for a number of years now. In my opinion, Graham got absolutely smoked. He got absolutely destroyed. Talk about cometh the hour, cometh the man, Flint Dibble. It really seemed like Flint was so well prepared. Graham didn't have any response, it seemed, to the huge amount of data Flint was bringing, both from underwater archaeology and prehistory. His only backup was that we haven't looked absolutely everywhere in the world, which is of course true and will remain true for forever. We can't excavate every inch of Earth. So he just wasn't making a strong argument against anything Flint was saying, in my opinion. I really don't think Graham was prepared to discuss like underwater archaeology off the coast of Florida or places like that. He just didn't seem to have a good answer to it. He was happily conceding that, of course, we would find evidence of hunter-gatherers at this time period, because, hunter-gatherers lived at that time period. But when pushed on, how could this destruction at the end of the Ice Age be so selective in its targeting? How can we have thousands upon thousands of sites from this time period of hunter-gatherers, and yet this civilization, which presumably built bigger monuments, bigger cities, more material culture, is just nowhere to be seen? And he could only fall back on the fact that we haven't excavated a lot of the Amazon, and we haven't excavated a lot of the Sahara. Didn't really make a strong positive case for this civilization. Flint seemed to be much more prepared. What was really strange, though, was that at about an hour and a half through, Graham concedes that none of the archaeology we have at the minute supports the existence of Atlantis. I'll put the full comment here so I don't take it out of context.
We are looking for this. No, we're not just finding shipwrecks, and we are finding plentiful Stone Age stuff, hunter-gatherer sites, and it strikes me as unbelievable that we have so many thousands of sites that show coastal interactions at the end of the Ice Age from these hunter-gatherers, but we have no evidence of a lost advanced civilization. That strikes me as, maybe this doesn't disprove it, but it makes it very, very hard to swallow, if you see what I mean, because nobody really understands how much archaeology we have. We have a lot these days. It is a study of big data. It's not a study of just going to one site after another. It's about aggregating this to understand how people were living at the past, and sometimes zooming in to get pictures of individual people and how they survived.
To draw, I have to really repeat myself here.
Yeah, I can go back up there.
We're looking at
Bimini?
less than 5% of the continental shelves that have been studied at all by archaeology. I'm not surprised that we find hunter-gatherer traces underwater. I'm very glad that we do. I would be very surprised if we didn't. But what I'm saying is that not enough of that 27 million square kilometers has been investigated. Only a tiny fraction has been investigated. And that fraction is not enough to draw the conclusion that we can absolutely say there was no lost civilization. Same goes for the Amazon rainforest. Same goes for the Sahara Desert.
But can we say there's no evidence for an advanced civilization in what they have studied?
In what they have studied, yes, we can say there's no evidence for an advanced civilization. But that brings us to another issue of what is studied and what is not studied by archaeology.
Now, at the end there, Graham obviously implies that we're not looking at the right place, we're not looking at the right evidence. His arguments are heavily based on mythology, but for him to concede that literally none of the evidence we have at the minute points to the evidence for Atlantis, it's got to be a huge concession. I'd be really interested to know in the comments what Graham Hancock's supporters think of that. Think of that comment. Think of that moment in the debate. It surprised me that he would say that. I was actually thinking about making a video on Graham Hancock this week anyway, because I had bookmarked a tweet by Dr. David Miano, legend, sharing an article from Graham's website where he now acknowledges that Gobekli Tepe, big site that you made a big fuss of, the development of Gobekli Tepe, is not the site where these Atlanteans transferred their knowledge to these pre-Neolithic people. Now he's looking at the Natufian culture, which predates Gobekli Tepe, which is what a lot of people said to him for years. Even me in my own humble videos on the topic was always wondering why Graham doesn't mention the Natufian culture. And on the one hand, it is great when someone who has made a very big deal about something publicly can admit to changing their mind. That's always great. And shout out to Graham for that. There's definitely no shame in changing your mind at all. But again, where does this leave the argument for Atlantis? I'd love to know what Hancock fans think about this. I'll put the link to his article in the description. This slow transition from simple structures in the Natufian period up to huge megalithic monuments in the early Neolithic period or at the very end of the pre-Neolithic period, that's sort of the mainstream archaeological viewpoint. And if Graham now shares that view, then why do we need Atlantis? The Natufian cultures, even though they are made out of stone, are quite simple. Did humans really need a lost civilization to come and teach them how to build round stone buildings? I think people can figure that out on their own. Where's the need for Atlantis anymore? It kind of reminds me a little bit of religion. And I hope I'm not going to offend anyone when I say this, but if you went back to the 1400s, right, God was responsible for everything. Why did my kid die? God. Why am I being sent off to fight for my king? God. Why did the river flood? God. God was the reason for everything, right? And as we've understood more and more about how the world works, God has had to retreat from some of these areas. God can now only sort of live in the gaps in our knowledge and has just become, I think, a personal, spiritual idea for people. Not so much responsible for the day-to-day running of the world. It's almost called I think it's called the God of the Gaps idea. And it strikes me that Atlantis is sort of similar. Atlantis now can only live in the gaps in our understanding. It can't live anywhere we've already excavated, because even Graham himself concedes that none of the archaeological evidence we have points to the existence of Atlantis. It can only exist in the places where we haven't excavated, the Amazon, the Sahara. Atlantis can only live in these gaps, and what's going to happen when we know more about the Amazon? And what's going to happen when we know more about the Sahara? It's going to shift to Antarctica. I mean, some people already put it in Antarctica. But it's just so convenient, isn't it? It's so convenient that Atlantis can only live in the gaps of our understanding.
I'm going to try and recall a few of your questions. The lost civilization that I'm thinking of is like a black hole in space to me. It's like something missing in the story of our past.
No evidence we have at the minute can support its existence. It's kind of damning. Honestly, if I was a big believer in Atlantis after watching that, I think I'd feel a bit deflated. But let me know in the comments how you feel about it. There were some funny moments. The debate didn't all go one way. There was a funny moment right at the start when Graham asked Flint about how much of the Sahara has been excavated or studied. And it is a very small area, and Flint, had to be asked the question several times before he would concede the point. That was funny. But to be fair, I think that was at the start of the debate, and Flint clearly came in with the attitude of he is going to present archaeological information. But yeah, still, a funny moment. There was another funny moment when they were talking about the site Sacsayhuaman, and Flint hadn't been there, and he was wondering if this picture that Graham was talking about was really of Sacsayhuaman. And in the top corner, the copyright on the image was from Graham's wife.
I also
Back
don't
to the
know
image,
if
please.
this is Sacsayhuaman.
Yes, it is.
This is on Quora, right?
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Let's go look and see what it's a
it's
photo
a
by
song.
Santa
It
Fe.
is,
So
it
it is okay. By your
Okay.
wife.
So the
That was another really funny moment. You really, have to respect how many of these places Graham has been to. Some people would say that he only talks about Atlantis because it's kind of a grift. I do think it's his life's passion. I do. I just also think he's wrong. All in all, Flint absolutely smashed it, in my opinion. in my opinion. Where does this leave the idea of Atlantis? I don't know. Was I going to say anything else? Nah, I wasn't going to say anything else. I would be really curious, though, if you're a big Graham Hancock fan, to let me know how you thought it went. Looking online, looking on Reddit, looking on Twitter, seems a lot of you didn't mesh with Flint's personality, saying he came off as arrogant. I don't personally believe he came off as arrogant. I think he came off prepared, and that Graham might have underestimated his opponent in this instance. But maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm terribly biased. I am a mere ape, after all. A mere ape. Finally, big shout out to Flint and Graham for even agreeing to do it in the first place. It can't be easy to go into a debate knowing literally millions of people are going to watch it. That's intimidating. It would intimidate me. So shout out to them for doing it. Flint said Joe was a great host on and off the camera, very polite, very respectful. So shout out to him for that too. And yeah, I think Joe was kind of convinced by Flint's argument. Seemed that way to me. Atlantis is dead, guys. It's over. It's done.